Hello to our friends joining us via recording. Today we're going to work on lesson number 6 from lab. So this is about the skeletal system. Before we dive into lesson number 6, we're going to review a few of the tissues because here's our friendly reminder that the lab exam is next week. Opens up on Monday, closes Tuesday night. So make sure you have a time planned sometime on Monday or sometime on Tuesday to sit down and take that exam. About a third of the exam is going to cover tissues. So that is identifying tissues, that's saying the locations of tissues, the functions of tissues, that's about a third of the exam. So keep that in mind. It's definitely worth your study time to put into these tissues. We started in, the question in the chat is, when is the exam again? It opens up at 12:01, first thing in the morning on Monday, October 5th. It closes at 11:59 p.m. on Tuesday, October 6th. So it's open for 48 hours, early Monday morning to late Tuesday night. That's when it will be open for you. All right, so we started in groups to work on identifying the tissues. So our first type of tissue that we see in our picture right here is correctly identified here as fibrocartilage. When we talk about fibrocartilage, connective tissue, can you share some notes with me in the chat? How were we able to identify this as fibrocartilage? What were some of the ways that we figured this one out? Yeah, so the color's a big one. Yeah, so Keenan's saying it's blue. This is, I believe, the only type of tissue that we look at that has blue in it. So we can definitely see those blue. Most of the screen that we're looking at with fibrocartilage is blue. And mixed in with that blue, you'll see the little pink dots. Those little pink dots are the cells. So if you ever see a tissue that's blue in general, or that has those pink spots in it, that's fibrocartilage. I guess as I'm talking, I realized we do have one other tissue that sometimes looks blue. That other kind of tissue that sometimes looks blue, I'll put it in the chat for us. Areolar loose connective tissue. Some of my areolar slides look blue, but not this pretty bright blue color. Fun fact, this is actually like my wedding colors from way back in the day. I'm an old person, so it's not like I got married like 2 years ago. It was actually, we celebrated our 10-year anniversary this summer in COVID. So my wedding colors were blue and pink. So I guess I should say this is my favorite color or my favorite kind of tissue, right? Because it matches those colors. Fibrocartilage. You all are like, too much information. Sorry, it's the coffee. I'm gonna blame the coffee. Too much information this morning. Yeah, 10 years is pretty exciting. Like I said, COVID anniversary, gotta love that. All right, next type of tissue here that we're looking at is correctly identified as spongy bone connective tissue. There are two different appearances that you'll see for spongy bone connective tissue. Either the entire thing is going to be pink and red, like we see on this slide, or some of the pictures that you'll see will also have kind of like dark purple in this middle space inside here. The big thing with spongy bone, the way you're going to identify it is some places are filled in and solid, and some places are not. So in here, they're kind of empty spaces. On my other slide, there's going to be like dark purple and red dots in this area. So we're going to talk more about spongy bone here in just a moment, but a quick friendly reminder that this stuff here is bone marrow that I find inside spongy bone tissue, and this solid stuff that I see here is actually the bone tissue itself. So when we talk about spongy bone, it has holes or it has spaces. That's where the bone marrow is mixed inside of it. My next type of tissue up here is another type of cartilage tissue. This is hyaline cartilage tissue. The way I told you guys to identify this one is if you see these sets of cells that come together in twos. These are a special type of cell when we're in cartilage. Let's see if I can find a space to type it. These special type of cells in cartilage are called chondrocytes. So chondrocytes are what we're seeing here that kind of look like those deer tracks in the snow. When we're talking about hyaline cartilage tissue, we just have this light pink or even almost translucent area that's outside of these chondrocytes. The way you'll identify it is the really large chondrocytes. As a friendly reminder, we said that this was a type of cartilage tissue too, fibrocartilage. That means these little pink dots are also chondrocytes. So these are also an example of cartilage cells because this is cartilage tissue. Fibrocartilage with the blue protein fibers. Hyaline cartilage, that's more pink. The entire thing is pink. When we look down here at this middle tissue, I know I'm skipping around, but when I look at my middle one down here, this is the last kind of cartilage that we have in the body. This is elastic cartilage. Help me out in the chat. How do I know that this one is elastic cartilage? What is there about this image that tells me this is elastic cartilage and not hyaline and not fibrocartilage? How did we know? Yeah, it does kind of look like a mix of both. Somehow we settled on the right answer. Okay, there we go. Nicole's offering an idea. Nicole's idea is the purple. And that was the key that I told you guys with tissues. The big thing with elastic anything, whether it's dense elastic connective tissue or whether it's elastic cartilage, the big thing is purple. So the fact that I see this purple all over in this slide, that tells me that I've got elastic proteins outside of my cells. The way I know that this is cartilage and not dense elastic connective tissue is because of my chondrocytes. It's because of those deer tracks that I see on my screen. Whenever you see these deer tracks, you're looking at a type of cartilage. When I see the purple on the outside of them, I know I'm looking at elastic. So this one here in the middle is elastic cartilage connective tissue. I know it's elastic because it's purple, and I know it's cartilage because of the really large chondrocytes. So two tricks there for elastic cartilage. This one over here on the left is compact bone connective tissue. When you're comparing compact bone to spongy bone, think about their names. Compact means everything's squeezed together. Spongy means it's a sponge. There's holes inside of it. So compact bone connective tissue is the one that kind of has tree ring patterns. We're going to talk about these here in just a moment. They're called osteons. When we talk about spongy bone, we do not see those tree ring patterns, those osteons. Last kind of tissue that I tossed out here for you was simple squamous epithelium. I'm going to add that epithelium word there to the end. Epithelium. The reason I put this one on here is kind of as a mental note for you guys. Notice how this is my simple squamous epithelium and this is my spongy bone. See how both of them kind of have branching lines inside of them? So I included it there on purpose, just as a reminder to compare different images of slides to each other. This is epithelial tissue because I have white space or I have open space completely on my slide. And I know that it's simple squamous because I've got these little thin lines of cells that are one cell thick. These dark spots in here are the nucleus of those cells. And because these cells are really flat and skinny, I would call them squamous, or sometimes they're squamous. Whatever word you like, it's whatever way you say it, you like it is fine. So simple squamous epithelium, my one type of epithelial tissue on here. Everybody else was connective tissue. And I picked these ones on purpose, especially these 5 right here, because when we look at one of the images from your guided lesson, this is one of the first things in the guided lesson, we saw a picture of the skeleton and the cartilages in the skeleton. So help me out here. I'm looking at the types of cartilage labeled, their locations labeled in different colors. So we're looking here at some type of cartilage tissue that's found in the intervertebral discs. It's found in the pubic symphysis. It's found in the knee. Which one is found in these red places? Which type of cartilage is found in the intervertebral disc and the pubic symphysis? Yeah, Nicole is correct. Fibrocartilage is the type of cartilage that's found in between the bones of the spine, called intervertebral discs. And it's also what's found in the pubic symphysis, which is a piece of cartilage that holds the two pubic bones together. I know I heard chatter in one of my groups of trying to figure out how to remember locations on types of tissue, especially when their image doesn't look like their location. An image like this might be helpful for you. When you're trying to figure out where the cartilages live, if you can remember that fibrocartilages live in these red places, that might help you out. Or let's see if we can figure this out here. We're talking about the costal cartilage, or when we're talking about the cartilage in a joint, the articular cartilage, or in the nose. Which kind of cartilage here is listed in blue? Do we know which kind lives in these places? We got to work on our locations, right? That's what we were saying in one of our groups. Got to study those locations. Yep, hyaline cartilage. Hyaline cartilage is the one that's found in the costal cartilages, connecting the ribs to the sternum. It's also found in a lot of your joints, so something called the articular cartilage. Your joints are called articulations. Another place that we find hyaline cartilage is in the fetal skeleton. So reference back to the tissue location and function guide that lists all those places. But hyaline cartilage is shown on this picture here in blue. So the places where you see blue, that's where we've got the hyaline cartilage. The last kind of cartilage then is the type that I find inside your ear. What's the last type of cartilage that we have in the body? It's the kind that's found in the ear. Yeah, last type of cartilage is that elastic cartilage. And remember that elastic cartilage, anytime I see something elastic, that means it looks purple on a slide. So I find that purple looking cartilage in the ear. I find that cartilage that on our slide looked pink and had the really big chondrocytes in places like the nose or the costal cartilage or inside those joints. And then I have the really thick fibrocartilage in places like the pubic symphysis or the intervertebral discs. So a study tip for the cartilages would be looking at this picture. Again, it's in the guided lesson to help you get a visual representation of where some of these tissues are. Help me out in the chat, or if you'd like to come on mic, you can totally could do that too. Do you guys have any other study tips to share about how you're learning locations or functions? Because like I said, that's a third of the exam. If we have any ideas, I'd love to hear them. How can we learn those things?
Well, I was suggesting to my group that I always used Quizlet for everything. And like for me, when I made my flashcards, they really didn't take me that long at all because it's so automatic. Like you just type in like elastic cartilage and then you put in the function and then the location, and then boom, that's the one. And that takes like 5 seconds to type everything down. And so then after you're done with all your flashcards, you have options of like it quizzing you for different things. So like it'll give you a matching quiz, it'll give you a multiple choice quiz, stuff like that. So that's really helped a lot.
That's awesome. Yeah, so Quizlet is the way to make electronic flashcards. I'll type its name just in case any of us haven't heard of it yet. Quizlet. Definitely look into that because you can build flashcards really fast, and I didn't know that about Quizlet, that you can quiz yourself in different ways. So that's awesome. Make yourself some flashcards. We are less than a week out from the exam, right? So we probably need to make those flashcards like now so that we can really start using them. Jacqueline posted in the chat that she's having trouble with reticular loose connective tissue. The thing that I would mention for you about reticular loose connective tissue, let me get out a little pencil here. When we talk about reticular connective tissue. Reticular connective tissue has reticular proteins in it. Reticular proteins kind of look like a net. They're branching. So when we talk about the functions of reticular loose connective tissue, think about the fact that it has reticular proteins in it, which are filtering proteins. So when we talk about the functions of reticular, it's things like filtering and removing, the kinds of things that a net protein would be good for. And when you think about locations on it, it's places where you're really filtering stuff out. So places like the spleen, or places like the lymph nodes, where we're pulling out bacteria or we're pulling out damaged red blood cells. So my study tip for you with reticular is think about the shape of those reticular proteins. Any other ideas? Does anyone else have ideas for reticular or particularly helpful otherwise ideas? Send me an emoji. In general, how do we feel about tissues right now? Where are we at right now with tissues? We still got a week to learn, but show me where we're at. Yeah, we got crying, some sad faces there. Yeah, so just point out, you can see our stream of emojis over there. A lot of us are not feeling thrilled about tissues. So again, I mentioned it with our multiple histology lab classes that we did together. The unfortunate reality is that with histology, it's just practice. We're just going to have to keep reviewing it until we start dreaming about tissues, right? Or until we start. I always love it when I get emails from students that they say that they were a restaurant, for example, and they looked at the floor and they saw simple cuboidal epithelium. I love those emails. So you know you've been studying enough when you start to see your types of tissue out in the real world. Not that we go to the real world anymore, right? But that's always fun. Yeah, the question that Kelvin asked and Jacqueline answered, yeah, no flashcards allowed, no nothing allowed for the lab exam. Just like there's nothing allowed for lecture exams too. You got to have your desk cleared off. We got to have no distractions. We got to have nothing there with us. So, right? Yeah, Jacqueline's like, if they were allowed, people wouldn't be freaking out about it, right? Yeah, so no resources allowed for the exam. Please make sure that we have cleared off our space and are ready to take that exam. All right, so this picture again, in the guided lesson, if you're a visual learner and you want to learn locations of my cartilage tissues, use this picture because it shows you the different types of cartilage where they're found in the body. There are two types of bone tissue that we identified in our groups. In the chat, help me out here. My picture on the left, which kind of tissue does that show? The picture on the left. Which one are we seeing there? Yeah, the one on the left is my compact bone connective tissue. Compact bone connective tissue. Which means my one on the right is showing me which kind of tissue? What's the one on the right showing me? Yeah, the one on the right is the spongy bone connective tissue. Spongy bone connective tissue. I know that this question was asked and somebody already answered it in the chat, but the format of the exam is exactly like the homework assignments you've been doing, so you won't have to type in the names of the tissues. We're not asking you to spell things in a particular way, so we're fortunate that we don't have to know the spelling, but we do need to make sure that if you look at those tissue type names, you've seen this on the homework, right? Where we're trying to identify tissues and there's literally like 30 names in the drop-down column because there's 30 plus different types of tissue that we've learned. So make sure you know what you're looking for because there's going to be a whole lot of distractors every time we're identifying a tissue. So on the left, we've got our compact bone. On the right, we've got our spongy bone. First thing we need to know with these tissues is being able to identify the difference between compact bone and spongy bone. When we're looking at compact bone connective tissue, there are a few particular things that we need to be able to identify in it. The first thing we need to be able to identify in it, I'm going to draw a little line here, and I'm going to ask you guys to help me out, are these dark spots. For any of my friends who have worked through the guided lesson on this, what is the name of those dark spots that we see on compact bone? What are these things called? Yeah, so the big black dark spots on compact bone tissue are called central canals. Central canals, I kind of like to think of them as the center of my tree ring pattern. So I got all of these little rings, these circles, that I find around my central canals, the dark spots in the middle. If this tissue was alive, there wouldn't be a black spot right here. There would be blood vessels right here. So the central canals are places where the blood vessels go into and out of our compact bone tissue. On our slides, they look like big black spots. We also have some little black spots that I can see all over the place on my slide here. All of these little black spots, what are these called? Does anyone happen to know the little black spots? Yeah, so the little black spots are called lacunas, a lacuna. And whenever you see that word lacuna, we're going to talk about this more in lecture in lesson number 8. When we see that word lacuna, the easy person word I want you to think of is home. I like, though, in the comment that Jacqueline says she sees lacuna and she thinks of a cocoon. That's a great way to think of it too. Yeah, so a cocoon or a home. When we talk about bone cells, because this is bone tissue, so when we talk about the cells that live in bone tissue, they have a special little home or a special little space called a lacuna. So when I look at a slide, I don't see the bone cells anymore. They're gone because I made a slide out of them. They died. But the spaces where they lived are still there. So the lacuna are the black spots, the spaces. The last thing that I see on this picture, and let me kind of circle, if you see the little spider web lines that are kind of on this slide here, go between the lacuna, those little things are called canaliculi. Let's see if I can spell it right. Canaliculi. This word canaliculi, think about it like a little central canal. So canaliculi help my bone cells. Bone cells are called osteocytes. As a reminder, let's type that out. Osteocytes. Canaliculi are the little passageways that allow my osteocytes that live in these lacuna, that live in these little homes, to share their nutrients with each other. Because the only place in this tissue where nutrients come into compact bone tissue is the central canal, which means that my bone cells that live close to the central canal, they're right by the supermarket. They can get nutrients and oxygen all day. But if you live all the way out here and you're really far away from the central canal, you still need nutrient and oxygen. The way you're going to get them is through these little canaliculi where other osteocytes share with you. So on compact bone tissue, we got to know the central canals, the big black spots. We got to know the little black lines called canaliculi, and we need to know the lacuna, the homes or the spaces where my osteocytes live. In spongy bone tissue, there's just a couple of things we need to recognize. The first thing we need to recognize is all the stuff, we mentioned this on the other side, that's the slide, that's outside of my bone tissue itself. All that stuff that I see outside, so do a circle here, all of this stuff here is that red bone marrow, red bone marrow. So red bone marrow is where we build new red blood cells, is inside that bone marrow. So I see red bone marrow on a spongy bone slide. And then I also see, let me trade colors so it doesn't match. I also see these structures here. These structures here in spongy bone tissue are called trabeculae. So trabeculae doesn't have spongy bone doesn't have central canals, doesn't have canaliculi, but it does have these things called trabeculae. The name literally means little beams. like the kind of beams you'd put in a ceiling to support it, little beams of wood. But I also kind of like to think of them as fingers. So imagine that the bone tissue here is little fingers that are reaching into the spaces. In between the fingers, you've got space for the bone marrow, but then the fingers themselves are called trabeculae. That's the bone tissue. So on compact bone and on spongy bone, make sure you can identify some of the markings that we were supposed to see as well. Not just identify them, but identify some of their markings as well. Hey, let me bounce back to our picture from before to mention this one down here is my compact bone tissue. When you look at compact bone tissue, see all of these central canals that I see all over the place. So compact bone tissue has a lot of central canals in it. There's lots of blood vessels that are going into it. And every single little black dot that you see all over the place on here, every single little black dot are those lacuna, those little homes or those cocoons for my bone cells. So lots of central canals and lots of lacuna when we look at a typical picture of compact bone tissue. Thumbs up or questions about compact bone versus spongy bone? Hannah says she doesn't know why it creeps her out so much. That would be interesting to know why it creeps out. All right, well, let's go then. Imagine that we're taking this type of tissue. Remind me in the chat again, this one on the left, what kind of tissue was this one? This type of bone tissue that I see on the left, yeah, this is the compact bone. So what we're going to do now is we're going to imagine that we took this compact bone tissue that I'm seeing on a slide that I'm looking from the top down onto. Now I'm going to look at a 3D model of that or representation of that. So this is what you see at the bottom of page 1 in your lab packet. We're looking at a model that shows us the parts of compact bone tissue. So when I'm looking at compact bone connective tissue, an idea for you to keep in mind about compact bone is that compact bone is found on the outside of bone tissue or of your body's bones. So compact bone is found on the outside of bones in the body. Compact bone is found on the outside. So and toward the end of the lesson, we're going to go through and look at a cross section where we cut a bone down the middle. The compact bone is found on the outside of it because compact bone makes a really smooth surface. Spongy bone is the one that's like a sponge. It's little fingers or little holes for bone marrow to be inside of. So when you look at compact bone tissue on a model, on the outer surface of that bone, we actually have connective tissue. So this gray part that you can kind of see in my picture right here, this gray part is a group of connective tissue known as the periosteum. Periosteum. Let me do some word breaking down for you here. So the beginning part, peri, means around. And anytime you see anything that has osteo in it or osteum in it, we're always thinking bone tissue. So the periosteum is the connective tissue that's on the outside of a bone. That connective tissue, as you can kind of see in our picture here, has blood vessels inside of it. So there's blood vessels that are in the outside and the connective tissue on the outside of a bone. That makes up something called the periosteum that's found around it. When we look inside the bone tissue itself, we can see some little spots here that have blood vessels inside of them. Who can remember from our previous discussion, what did we call those spots in bone tissue where there were blood vessels inside of compact bone? What were these little areas called where there was blood vessels? And here's my hint. I'm going to color it black. Yeah, so a couple of us are chiming in the chat. I'll color in another one black here. When we're looking at our model that's showing us tissue that's still alive, when the bone tissue is still alive, we have blood vessels inside those places called the central canal. So this is the dark spots on our slides. On my model, I can see that there's blood vessels inside of them. So the places in compact bone tissue where you see blood vessels are called central canals. What was the name of the little spots that I found my bone cells inside of? What are all of these little spots called down here? Yeah, so all of my little spots are those homes, or those little cocoons for my cells called lacuna. I'll mention for you, I highlighted several little lacuna down here, several little spots down here, but everywhere you see a spot, so these little spots up here, and these here in the middle, and these ones over here, all of these spots are all lacuna. So I've got lacuna all over the place in compact bone tissue. You can put that label on your image wherever you want to. I just picked down here in the bottom since we're not labeling other things down in this area. When we talk about our lacuna, our little homes, the lacuna arrange themselves in special lines called lamellae. So let me type that for you. The word you see in your packet that you have to identify things as, it has that word lamellae in it. That's my anatomy word that I want you to replace in your mind with the word lines. So my lacuna, my homes for my bone cells, are arranged in lamellae. That's lines. When we think about lamellae, think about it kind of like how all of our houses or our apartment buildings are built along a street. So streets inside bone cells are these lamellae. We arrange all of the lacuna in lamellae, in lines. There's two kinds of lines that I arrange them into. The first kind of lines are what I see right here. So I'm going to draw them on this part of my image right here. I've kind of got some lines of cells in here. Or you can see it here with this one. These lines of cells, these lamellae that are found directly around a central canal. So I've got two central canals and then I've got lines of cells that are around it. These ones that are in circles around my central canal, those ones are called concentric lamellae, concentric lamellae. And this is a geometry word. Geometry was not my favorite. I didn't like it. But if you see concentric, think about circles, because concentric circles are when we draw one circle and then we draw one around it, draw one around it. These guys are concentric circles. So if you just picture this, when you see that word concentric, you should be able to find them. The lines of bone cells that are around a central canal are the concentric lamellae. Not all of my lines are around central canals. Not all of them make these pretty little circles here. Some of them, like I see here on the outside, are lines that I find by the outside of the bone. So these ones here on the outside don't make those pretty circles that we see in other places. These ones out here, you can see the lines separated from one another right here. These ones right here, because they're found on the outside of the bone, are called circumferential lamellae. Circumferential lamellae, as in they're found on the circumference or the outside of the circle, or the outside in this case of a bone. So I've got lines of bone cells, lamellae, that are found on the outside, the circumference of this bone. Those ones are called circumferential lamellae. When I have them arranged in circles, concentric circles, I call those concentric lamellae. Let's see. So there's only one thing that we didn't label, The one thing that we didn't label is an osteon. Something I want you guys to write down in your notes. We're going to do a little word math together here. So an osteon, we're going to do equals. Here's our little word math right here. An osteon equals a concentric lamella, or concentric lamellae, those circle lines, plus a central canal, plus the blood vessels that are inside of them. So an osteon is my circle lines of cells plus the blood vessels that are found in the very middle. When I look at my model, I have osteons all over the place. So let me pick a new color here that we haven't used. We're going to add here. So I'm going to circle some osteons in red. The best osteon that I know is a little hard to tell in my picture, but see this little kind of wedding cake looking thing over here on the right? So I've got all of these lines, these concentric lamellae that have cells in them, and then I got blood vessels here in the middle. That's one osteon. But I also have, let me draw another circle for you, an osteon right here. And I've got an osteon right here, and I've got another one over here. Any of the places where a central canal and you see those lines of cells around it, all of those are osteons. Typically, here's a heads up for you for labeling on the homework assignment. Typically, when we ask you about an osteon, you're probably going to see a bracket. So you're probably going to see, let me draw it here, I'll do it in black. You'd probably see something like this. We'd ask you to label this right here. Or we'd ask you to label with a bracket like that. So typically, if I'm asking you about an osteon, I'm going to give you a bracket because an osteon includes the lines of cells and the blood vessels in the middle. Usually I ask that by putting a bracket around things. Or maybe I put a really dark circle around an entire thing. So that's a heads up for you. If we're asking about the osteon, it's got to be the central canal and those circles that are found around it. The other way I can look at compact bone tissue, not from the top down, but from the side, helps me to see a few other things a little bit better. So over here, on the right part of my image over here, this is that thing I told you kind of looks like a wedding cake. So see how I've got all of these little stacks on top of each other? Each of these were those circles of bone cells that I find around blood vessels. I know it's long. I'm going to ask you to type something long. But what do I call each of these lines? It's a line of cells that are in a circle. My lines of cells in a circle. Does anyone remember what those ones were called? So the lines word is lamellae, right? So lamellae, can't spell it, equals lines. And that circle part equals concentric. So each of these little lines that I see right here, each of these is a concentric lamella. It's a line that goes in a circle. I have concentric lamellae. I have a bunch of little circles here. And in the very middle, I have a blood vessel, which means this entire thing right here, this wedding cake, is called an osteon. An osteon. So all of this is an osteon. The concentric lamellae, plus there's a blood vessel hiding inside. We labeled that on the last slide. All of this is an osteon. So this is a different picture of the same model that we saw on the previous page that we labeled. Just as a heads up, this is what the osteon looks like from a side. So you can see each of those concentric lamellae that are around each other. Yeah, so Jacqueline, you're 100% right that this whole thing is an osteon. Yeah, no, you're good. Couple other things that we need to label on this image here. I've got, here, let's use a rectangle here. I've got some spaces on my slide where I have blood vessels. They're in the very middle of my osteon here. What do each of those squares represent? What are my rectangles, excuse me, rectangles representing on here? What did I just highlight? Any idea? Yeah, these are what, if we looked at bone tissue from the side, this is what a central canal looks like. A central canal. It's the place in bone tissue where I have blood vessels that go up and down. So there's blood vessels here, there's blood vessels here. Central canals, they go straight up and down. If you notice on my picture, I do also have some places where I've got space for blood vessels that are going at an angle. My space for where the blood vessels go at an angle, they're still called canals because they have blood vessels, but this type of canal are called perforating canals. Perforating canals because they go at an angle. So the little lines that you see here with blood vessels that are at an angle, those ones are perforating canals. The straight up and down ones where blood vessels go straight up and down in the bone tissue, those are the ones called central canals. Let me see, I'm looking at my list here. You guys can do this for me. Up above my pointer finger up here, there's that pencil. Do me a favor. I want you to try to circle or label, point an arrow to the periosteum on this picture. Grab that pencil and show me where the periosteum is. Yeah, there we go. Periosteum. Peri meant around. Peri, around. And osteum being bone. Periosteum on the outside here. So I love all the colors we're representing this morning, right? So the periosteum is this connective tissue, gray stuff on the outside. Remember I told you that it has blood vessels, and those perforating canals that I can see over here, they actually perforate, or they're going at an angle from the periosteum into the bone tissue. So they'll have little branches that go up to bring arteries, or branches that go up to bring veins in here. And then they'll branch again to go to the next neighboring central canal. And we probably would see even some that would connect over here. So perforating canals help us to get some of that blood supply from the outside, the periosteum layer, to the central canals where it goes up and down inside the bone tissue. One more thing I want you guys to find for me. Where are there lacuna in this picture? Where do you see lacuna? Use that pencil. Let's find some. Perfect. Yep, we got all kinds of lacuna, right? We can label them all over the place. Any little brown dots. There we go. I was gonna say this part over here wasn't feeling the love. So any of the little brown dots that we see on our model, all of them are lacuna. All of them are the homes, the cocoons for our bone cells. So lacuna all over the place. Remember that lacuna arrange themselves in lines called lamellae. If those lines are circular, they're called concentric lamellae. If those lines are like this, see these lines over here of my cells? These ones over here were the circumferential, I'll type that, circumferential lamellae, the ones that are on the outside, on the circumference. So lamellae, lines of lacuna, the cocoons or the homes that the cells live inside of. So keep in mind as you're studying and as you're labeling these pictures in your packet, these pictures show me, gonna bounce back here, the same thing as this tissue right here. So this is, if I took compact bone tissue and I turned it into 3D, I end up with the model that I see here, where I can see that osteon sticking up, or where I can see from the side, I can see those central canals that are in the middle there. So compact bone tissue, we need to know it on models, and we need to know it on the slide as well. You're good, Hannah. I was wondering about your hand up there. Thumbs up or any other questions on here before we move on? We're a little bit quiet today. I suspect that we didn't have a lot of time to work on this lab lesson. Is that true? There's no shame if that's true. It's okay. Yeah, all of the Jacqueline will be on the exam. Yep, so the lab exam includes packets from lesson number 1 all the way through lesson number 6. So we got to know all of that review stuff as well as the new stuff this week. Christina, I suspect your yay is sarcastic, right? Hooray for that. Yeah, just a little bit. Yeah, now I feel ya. Okay, what I'm going to do next with you guys is I'm going to talk with you about the types of the bones that we have in the body. Quick reminder for you that you do need to know the names of all of the bones from week number 1. This is where it's good that you have that review assignment again, because it's going to help you remember all the different things we've talked about this semester. Because the names of bones, that was way back in week 1. We've slept a little bit, right? Not very much. We slept a little bit since week 1. So we might have forgotten we have to know the names of the bones. But that review assignment will help you remember, right, I've got to review those things to get ready. When we talk about bones in the body, they come in different structural classifications. So I am looking at the hand right here. I'm looking at an X-ray of the hand. I want us to see if we can figure out, if we can remember, let's put it a different way here, remember the names of the types of bones that we have in the hand. So I'm going to start with putting a yellow box around some bones out here. Do we remember the names of the bones that I find in your fingers? What are these guys called? Yeah, these ones here on the outside are called the phalanges. The phalanges. So all of your finger bones, it would include these ones too, by the way. They didn't make it into my little square, but it would include these guys too. So my finger bones are called phalanges. By the way, my 3-year-old knows that. So make sure you know as much as Wallace's 3-year-old, right? The next set of bones I'm going to highlight here, we'll do these ones in green. The ones in your wrist, the bones that are in your wrist, what do we call those ones? The wrist bones down there. Yeah, the wrist bones are called the carpals. The carpals. The reason I did those ones first before these ones right here is because the name of these ones relates to these ones here. Does anyone know what I call these ones here in orange? What are these guys called? Yeah, these ones here in orange are called the metacarpals. Oops, I didn't. Here we go. Watch me. Here we go. We're going to delete that. I'm so proud of my Blackboard Collaborate skills today, guys. It's intense. Metacarpals. There we go. Okay. So my metacarpals are the bones that you find in the palm of your hand. A way that I like to remember that these are the metacarpals is they meet the carpals. It's where the fingers, the phalanges, meet the carpals, the one that's in the middle. So metacarpals in the palm of your hand, phalanges in your fingers, carpals down here in the wrist. Now, I'm going to say something completely sarcastically. Here we go. I know that you guys are doing nothing right now, right? Like you have way more time on your hands than you know what to do with, right? There's my sarcasm. Here's something though that's not sarcastic. If you do happen to have a little bit of extra time, as a heads up, where we're going with our anatomy class is we are going to learn the name of each of these carpals. For the midterm exam, we just need to know that this group is called the carpals. For the final exam, we're going to have to know the name of each of these guys. So if you happen to have a little bit of extra time, which I know right now is slammed, right? But if you happen to have some extra time when you're doing your Google searching for different things for this midterm exam, if you want to start looking at these names, we will learn the names of these guys in I don't know, I guess it's probably like 6 or 7 weeks. So you got plenty of time till then. Okay, phalanges, metacarpals, carpals. The reason that I wanted us to label these first was because when we look at the hand and we look at the bones of the hand, we see some of our structural classifications of bones that we have in the body. So when I'm talking about my phalanges, or when I'm talking about my metacarpals, I call those bones long bones. They're called long bones. Now, when you think of long bones, probably normally you would think of things like the humerus or the radius and the ulna, really long ones. But here's my definition of long bones. Long bones are longer than they are wide. Long bones, when we're talking about their definition, how I would define them, they're longer than they are wide. So see how we call one of them, it's called a phalanx. So see how this phalanx is really long, not very wide. That makes it a long bone. Or see how this metacarpal is really long and not very wide. That makes it a long bone. Now, long bones, again, are going to also include the really long bones, like the femur and the humerus. Hey, let's do some review together, because this always trips us up here. Down here in the bottom of my x-ray, I can see the radius and the ulna. When I'm pointing at this one, can we figure out which of these bones, is this one right here the radius or the ulna? Ooh. Okay, so I like Karina's comment because it gives us a why. This one right here is the radius. The way I know it's the radius is because it's on the thumb side. Jessie says she broke hers. Ouch. So radius is on the thumb side. Ulna is on the pinky side. Yeah, so Nicole is mentioning the ulna is medial. And in this picture, it's hard for us to tell medial versus lateral. The way that you're always going to be able to tell is by looking at those fingers. So the radius is always on the thumb side. The ulna is always on the pinky side. Think of up. That's the way I remember. UP, ulna, pinky. So the ulna is always on the pinky side. The radius is always on the thumb side. This, if you're trying to visualize how this picture was taken, if you put your hand on your desk, so this is the left hand, if you put your left hand on your desk and you took an x-ray from the top down, that's what we're looking at here. So this is the radius side with the thumb. This is the ulna side with the pinky. So radius and ulna, again, best reference point is to reference where's that thumb. That's the radius side. So the radius and the ulna here, I'll add their little names down here at the bottom. Radius on the thumb side, ulna on the pinky side. Oh, here we go. Use my mad skills. Look at that. Okay. Radius and ulna. Ulna, radius. Both of those are also long bones because they're longer than they are wide. When I talk about bones like the carpals are what we call short bones. Oops, short bones. Short bones are kind of cube-shaped. They're about as long as they are wide. So good example of these are the carpals. Those are short bones. Most of my bones called the tarsals are also short bones. Where are the tarsals found in the body? Where do I find tarsals? Yeah, the tarsals are in the feet. Yep, the tarsals make up the ankle. So the ankle bones. Most of your foot, so the flat part of your foot, has a type of bone called metatarsals. And then you got little phalanges down in your feet as well. But the bones that make up your ankle are called tarsals. The vast majority of them are short bones. But here's something, because I got an email from a student asking about this. There is one particular tarsal that we actually call an irregular bone. So I'm going to toss this out for you, and I want you guys to make a note of it and kind of do a Google search later for this. There is a tarsal bone called the calcaneus. This is your heel bone. So when you feel the bone in your heel, you're feeling the calcaneus. The calcaneus is technically an irregular bone. Irregular bone. The reason I mention that is because you do actually see the calcaneus labeled on the homework assignment. So the calcaneus bone, the heel bone, that one is an irregular bone. The rest of the tarsals are considered short bones. So the rest of them are cube-shaped, short bones. So carpals and tarsals, in general, I want you to think of them as short bones. Phalanges, metacarpals, radius, and ulna, those guys are long bones. There's a type of bone that I can see in this picture that I want to mention that we can't see on if we were looking at these models in the lab, but when we look at on x-rays, we can see them. Oop, okay, got to use my skills here. If you look in the middle of the little circle here, your eyes don't deceive you. In the middle of the circle, you can see a little white spot right there. That is a type of bone that we call a sesamoid bone. A sesamoid bone. Sesamoid bones are very different across people. So if I were to look at your sesamoid bones, look at my sesamoid bones, they look very different. The definition of a sesamoid bone is just a bone found inside a tendon. A bone found inside a tendon. We see them in places where there's a lot of movement. So I like to joke that this person here that's having their hand x-rayed, this person must be a video gamer because they're using their thumb all over the place, using it all the time. Because when you use something, when a tendon is moving a whole bunch, you can actually develop these little sesamoid bones. So common places to see sesamoid bones are in the palms of your hands and in the soles of your feet. Little tiny sesamoid bones that we find in these places. There is also one big sesamoid bone that all of us have though. Anyone who's done the guided lesson, can you tell me what's the name of the big sesamoid bone that we all have? Yeah, we all have a big sesamoid bone called the patella. The patella. Okay, that's another one that my 3-year-old knows where it is. So Monica already beat me to it. The patella is the kneecap. So the kneecap bone, the patella, that is considered a sesamoid bone. So a sesamoid bone is a bone that's found inside a tendon. The only particular one we're learning is the patella, but everybody has different little sesamoid bones that we'd find, again, mostly in the palms of your hands and in the soles of your feet, based on the way that you use those fingers. There is one other, let's see, short bones, long bones, sesamoid. Okay, flat bones is the one that we haven't talked about yet. So to do that, I'm actually going to flip over to an image slide here. Help me out on my slide here. We can use our pencil again. Do we see a bone that we have a picture of here that looks like it might be considered a flat bone? Yeah, there we go. Circle for me. We got a flat bone right here. What is the flat bone that we're looking at right here? What flat bone do we see right here? Yeah, so this is what the sternum looks like. We're used to seeing a sternum in the center of the chest, right? That's where the sternum's found, in the very center. Hey, let's do a regional term review. The sternum is found in the sternal region. That's how the sternal region got its name, right? So very center of your chest is where I find the sternum. The sternum is a good example of a flat bone. Other places in the body that we have a flat bone, places like your skull. So the sides of your skull. Here, let's do some review here. The bones on the side of your skull are called the parietal bones. Toss that name out there again. The bone in your forehead is called the frontal bone. Many of my flat skull bones are considered flat bones. So we talked about our classifications here. Let's help each other out. This bone right here that I have highlighted that I'm pointing to, which of those classifications of bones would we say that this one is right here? Yeah, this one right here is long bone. Can you help me out and circle, are there any other long bones that you see on this slide? Any other long bones that we see here? Perfect. Yep. Hey, I'm going to be tricky on you here. When we're talking about long bones, oh, nice. Yeah, we even went into our picture over here. Love it. Yep, there's long bones all over the place, right? Okay, I want to focus on this one and this one. This, by the way, is the front and back view of our bones here. This one or this one. Which of those, so number one or number two, which of those is, trying to figure out how I want to ask this question. I'll ask it this way. What's the name of this bone right here? Any guesses? Can we tell what bone we're looking at up here? Ah, you guys are on point. Yep, this one is the humerus. Okay, I'm going to erase it all. Here goes everything. Goodbye, our friends. All right. This one up here is the humerus. We are correct. That one is the humerus. What is the other one, the other long bone that I have two views of? Yep, that one is the femur. Usually when I ask that question in class, we get all mixed up. We think this one's the femur. Here is, I'm proud of us for most of us figuring it out. Let me point out for you the way that you can tell the difference between them if they're by themselves. See this part right here? That's sticking out compared to this part right here. That is, your eyes are not deceiving you. It doesn't stick out as much. This is called the head of the femur, and the head of the femur sticks out a ton. The head of the humerus doesn't stick out as much. If somebody breaks their hip, they probably broke this part right here that connects the head of the femur to the rest of the femur bone. So the femur has a very prominent head that sticks out. The humerus does not have as prominent of a head. So that's a big way we tell the difference between them. Both of them, though, are long bones, just like this one right here. This one right here is actually labeled on your table. The name of this bone is metacarpal, or excuse me, proximal phalanx number 4. I'll write that name for you. It's on your table. Proximal phalanx number 4. We're going to talk more about this when we learn the names of the bones of the hands more specifically, but we already know some of these things. When I talk about this word proximal, what does proximal mean? Good exam review for us. What does proximal mean? Yeah, Nicole's exactly right. Proximal means closer to the attachment point, so closer to my joint here. Here's my finger. I have 3 phalanges that I find in the finger. I've got the phalanx that's closest to the attachment point. I've got the phalanx that's farthest, and I've got the phalanx that's in the middle. I can name each of these bones based on how close they are to the attachment point. So this one is the proximal phalanx. This is the one that's closest to the hand. This one out here is the distal phalanx. It's the farthest from the hand. And this one is called the middle one because it's the one in the middle. So first part of the name of this bone could be proximal, middle, or distal, which of my 3 it is. Second part of its name is that it's number 4. This is literally just math. And again, my 3-year-old could do this. Thumb is number 1, pointer number 2, middle number 3, ring finger number 4. So proximal phalanx number 4, we count over to finger number 4, and it's the phalange, it's one of the phalanges, it's the phalanx that's closest to the hand, proximal phalanx number 4. Again, what did we say our structural classification of this bone was? What's the classification of this one? Yeah, this one was a long bone because it's longer than it is wide. Long bone right here. Hey, here's one of my bones, one of my particular carpals, and your table has this particular carpal labeled for us. This one is called the trapezoid. And again, that's something we'll learn for the final exam. But the trapezoid right here, good example of a carpal bone. Just like the rest of my carpal bones, they're all classified the same way. What's the classification of carpal bones? Yeah, carpal bones are those cube-shaped bones, those short bones. So short bones here, short bones in the tarsals. This particular one, again, called the trapezoid. Our last classification of bones that we see, here's an example of one of them up here. This is a vertebra. So vertebrae are the bones that make up your spine. We have 3 kinds of vertebrae. This particular one is called a thoracic vertebrae. Thoracic vertebra, it's one of them. Can you describe for me in the chat, where is the thoracic region? Where is the thoracic region? Yeah, the thoracic region is your chest region. So this is a vertebra that's found in the part of your spine that is around the rib cage. It's called a thoracic vertebra. We have some vertebrae above it that are in the neck. We have some vertebrae below it that are in your lower back. Which of those places, is it the neck or the lower back, that I would describe the vertebrae as lumbar vertebrae? Where would lumbar vertebrae be found? Yeah, the lumbar vertebrae are down low. They're in the lower back. The cervical vertebrae are up in the neck. So we actually have 3 types of vertebrae in the body. The cervical ones that are in the cervical region, the thoracic ones in the thoracic region, the lumbar ones in the lumbar region. So again, reminder for us of regional terms, which is something we will definitely be seeing on our midterm exam. Vertebrae, all of my vertebrae really are examples of irregular bones. So vertebrae, because they have this part that sticks out, and then they've got this cube-shaped part, they've got some flat parts. When you're looking at a bone, if it doesn't look normal, like a flat bone, it doesn't look like a long bone, doesn't look like a cube, it has a weird shape, then we would call that an irregular bone. Irregular bones, the last classification. How do we feel about classifying bones based on their shape? Give me a thumbs up or tell me what questions we have. Oh, I got a unicorn. I like that. I will take it. Here, let me give you my penguin. Okay, so Nicole asked a specific homework question about the lateral cuneiform. Have we done a Google search yet to figure out where that bone is found? Do we know where that bone is? Yeah, it's tarsal bone. So what's our classification of tarsal bones? What do we say in general tarsal bones are? Yeah, in general, tarsals are short bones. So that's another one. There's another one of those names that we're going to learn in the second half of the semester. The lateral cuneiform is one of our tarsal bones. Hey, review for the midterm exam. What does the word lateral mean? What does lateral mean? Yep, toward the outside. We've got a lateral cuneiform, and we have a medial cuneiform, and we also have an intermediate cuneiform. Just toss that out there. Kind of like with our fingers here, how we had a distal and a proximal and a middle. When we talk about the cuneiforms, we're going to have a medial, a lateral, and an intermediate. So the good news is when we're learning bone names, at least some of them have basically the same name. It's just a directional term that's different. So that helps. Directional terms, gotta love them, right? Gotta make sure we know those guys for the exam. When we talk about a typical long bone, here, let's see if we can remember or we can figure it out. This picture I'm looking at right here, is a cross section of a particular bone in the body. Which bone am I looking at from the outside and from the inside? Can we tell which bone this one is? Yeah, this one's the femur. Again, we can tell because we got that big head that sticks out, right? So I can see the femur. It has its big head up here. I'm looking at the femur from the outside and from the inside. When I talk about long bones in general, there are a couple of parts that we need to know. It doesn't matter if we're on the outside or the inside. So let me put these big picture words that we need to know, regardless of whether we're on the outside or the inside. The words are epiphysis and diaphysis. Now, when you see the word epiphysis, what I want that to trigger in your mind is that it means it's an end of the bone. Epiphysis with an E is an end of the bone. Diaphysis is what we would call the shaft of the bone. So when I'm looking at my picture here, the diaphysis of the bone is going to be here, the shaft of the bone. The diaphysis and the diaphysis is the shaft of the bone. Hey, notice how I've got these brackets on your picture? These brackets are asking you to name the big picture area of the bone. So if we're working on the homework assignment and you see a question that's asking you about something in a bracket, we're looking for these words here, epiphyses or diaphysis. So this big bracket here in the middle that shows the shaft of the bone, the long skinny part of the bone, that is my diaphysis. When I look at these brackets here, these brackets both represent an epiphysis, an end, epiphysis. But if you look at your worksheet, we're not just supposed to label it epiphysis, we are supposed to label it proximal or distal. Again, there come those directional terms. We got to make sure we know them. In the chat, remind me, the word distal, what does distal mean? What does the word distal mean? Yeah, distal means farther away, right? Farther away from the point of attachment. Okay, so this is the femur. This is the femur bone. It's found in the femoral region. That's how it got its name. It's found in your thigh region. When I'm talking about the distal epiphysis, is that going to be the part of the femur that I find at the hip joint or the knee joint? Which end is going to be distal, the hip or the knee? Yeah, the knee is going to be the distal end, right? So my distal epiphysis is the part of the femur that's closer to the knee because that's farther from where the leg attaches. The proximal epiphysis is going to be the part that's found by the hip joint. So the proximal epiphysis on a femur is going to have the head of the femur. The distal epiphyses are going to be the part that's down by the knee, the distal part. The diaphysis there in the middle. When you're looking at the outside of a long bone like the femur, all we can label are those regions. So I can only label the two epiphyses, the two ends, proximal and distal, and the diaphysis. When I'm looking inside my long bone, there's a few other things that I can see as well. So one of the things that I can see is this little section here in the middle of the bone. This is actually an open space in the middle of the bone. The open space in the middle of the bone is called medullary cavity. So if you see on the homework assignment or on the exam an arrow pointing to the very middle of the bone, we're talking about the medullary cavity. This is actually an open space inside there. Here, I'll take away my circle so you can see better. It's an open space inside the bone. See how there's kind of a divot inside here? This is the part inside a long bone where I'd find my spongy bone connective tissue. Translation being, this is the part of the bone where I would find my bone marrow. So if you're donating bone marrow, for example, this is where they would go inside the bone to find it, in the medullary cavity. It's a hollow open space. Granted, in adults, instead of having red bone marrow in here, we pretty much always have yellow bone marrow. Hey, not a trick question here. If I'm thinking about a type of tissue that we looked at that is yellow, any guesses what yellow bone marrow might be made out of? Any ideas? Yeah, so we're nervous, but we're right. Yellow bone marrow is actually made out of adipose tissue. It's actually fat. So one of the places in your body that you store fat is inside the medullary cavity. We have yellow bone marrow inside that cavity there. So open space called the medullary cavity. Obviously, I can only see that when I'm inside a bone. I can't see that on the outside because it's a central part in the middle. When we're trying to figure out where there's spongy bone that surrounds the medullary cavity, but the other place you can see it really well too is up here. And here I'm going to zoom in a little bit so we can see. Notice when I look up close at this cross section of bone, how there's places where there's holes inside here. There's a lot of spongy bone right here. I'm going to scroll down. There's also a lot of spongy bone down here. My epiphyses have a lot of bone, spongy bone in them, the epiphyses. You can see it here. And again, we can see it really well up here in this region. Everywhere on this bone that's on the outside, oh, here, let's use another directional term here. Superficial, closer to the outside. Compact bone tissue is superficial or on the outside of my spongy bone tissue. The place you can see it best, see how thick this solid line of bone is right here, and I've got a solid line of bone right here. That solid line of bone is compact bone tissue. So compact bone tissue on the outside, spongy bone tissue lining the medullary cavity, but also a lot in our two epiphyses, the distal epiphysis and the proximal epiphysis. I believe, let me look at, yep, okay. So I believe that's the last part of the worksheet that we're going to walk through together as a big group, and then we're going to do a little bit of group work again, and then come back together to talk about the last activity in this worksheet. Before I split us up into groups to work again, and before I have to stop this recording, before we start another one, do we have any questions about what we've covered so far? Any questions about this content that we've covered? I got crickets in the chat. Actually, they need to make a little emoji for that, right? Little crickets. Okay, well, let me explain what we're going to do now. That I'm going to split us into groups. We're going to work for a little bit in our groups, and then we're going to come back together to wrap things up to compare answers. Last page of the lab packet. Oh, perfect. Karina found a cricket. Awesome. Love it. Last page, well, not quite the last page. The page before the last page in your lab packet has pictures of two bones. These bones are the femur. I can see your first picture is the femur, and your second picture is of the skull. For the midterm exam, we are not memorizing specific bone markings. I'm not going to ask you to tell me where the zygomatic process of the temporal bone is. I'm not going to make you memorize that for the midterm exam. I'm not going to make you memorize where the style process is for the midterm exam. What I am going to make you memorize, though, is when we talk about something that's a foramen, or when we talk about something that's a process, when we talk about these particular things, I need you to be able to tell me, oh yeah, that's something that sticks out, or that's something that means it's a hole, that's something that means it's an indentation. So what we're going to do with our groups to help us start to think this way is we're going to go through and label the specific bone markings on these bones using the list that's provided here. We're going to label these particular bone markings. Now, I don't expect you to have this memorized because we haven't talked about it yet. Google is your friend. So Google Images or the guided lesson has some pictures with these bone markings labeled. You're trying to figure out which of these areas each of these words represent. So we need to figure out what name goes with each of these arrows here on the femur, what name goes with each of the arrows here on the skull. Once you've figured out the name that goes with each of these arrows, you'll notice that part of the name of each of these structures is in bold. The part that's in bold helps you to match up with the part that's in bold in our descriptions over here. So you've got a picture that we're labeled the fancy anatomy names for these bone markings, and your other picture gives you the easy person words for what their name means. So when we figure out what this bone marking is called in technical words, then I can look over to its description and in easy words. This is a bone projection, meaning it's something that sticks out and it's attached to the zygote bone. Or when we figure out the technical name of this bone marking, its easy person name is outside hearing hole. You don't care as much about the descriptions except for the part that's in bold, because the very last page of your lab packet has tables with lists like this. We need to figure out which of these words, so it's listed on page 5, which of these words, let me zoom out, sorry, go back to normal, not working, okay. Which of these words here means a hole? Which of those words means an indentation? Which of those words means an edge? All of these words here that you see, ooh, I'm frozen. All the words that you see in bold are the words that are labeled in bold on your pictures. So if we go back here, projection, hole, edge, hole. So we're trying to do a little bit of matching here. Need to figure out which of these words in bold means a hole, which of these means a projection, which of these means, let me go back one, an indentation or a bump. So I'm going to split us up into groups. I'm going to give us about 10 minutes to try to get things labeled and to try to sort out some of the words. And then we'll come back together for the last 10 minutes and work on our labeling, working on our sorting together. So when I split you back up into groups, you should be able to navigate back to these pictures in the slide and label them. It's not going to have this half of the picture, it's just going to have this part. So bear that in mind when you're labeling. I'm going to keep bouncing between the groups to help you guys out. Let's see if we can get it labeled, and then we'll come back together and talk about it. So friends on the recording, look for a part 2 recording where we go over our answers for this. Oops.